The arena was alive with noise, a storm of savage voices that rose like thunder. Thousands of alien females stood on the high walls, their golden eyes burning with hunger for violence. They shouted, stamped their clawed feet, and pounded their weapons against the stone. The air was thick with the smell of blood and smoke, and every echo promised death. In the middle of the arena stood one figure, a man, the last human, the only survivor of a race that once spread across the stars. His body was scarred, his clothes torn, and his strength nearly gone. But his eyes, dark and unyielding, refused to bow. The aliens looked at him with cruel delight. To them, he was prey, a rare beast dragged from the ruins of a forgotten war. They did not see a warrior, only a trophy to be broken for their amusement. Yet the man stood tall, even when chains hung heavy from his wrists. The arena floor was rough, carved from ancient black stone. Dried blood marked the ground like paint, a reminder of hundreds of battles lost by others. Above, banners of the alien queens rippled in the hot wind, painted with sharp teeth and crimson axes. This was not a place of justice, it was a place of fear. The guards pushed him forward, their spears close to his back. The crowd howled louder, their alien voices merging into one command. Fight, fight, fight. The man did not answer, but his heart pounded with steady fire. He looked around the arena, searching for a way out, but the walls were high and lined with spikes. Above them, energy shields shimmered faintly, trapping him in a cage of light. There was no escape, only survival or death. From a dark gate at the far side, his first opponent emerged. She was tall, her body armored with bone plates, her arms heavy with muscle. Her fangs glistened and her eyes locked on him with burning hatred. In her hand she carried a double-edged blade, glowing faintly with alien fire. The crowd roared with excitement. To them, this was sport, a game of blood where only the strong lived. They wanted to see the last human torn apart, his bones scattered as a warning to others. But the man thought of Earth, his home long gone. And a strength deeper than muscle rose inside him. The female warrior charged, her blade cutting through the air. The man moved aside, quick like a shadow, his body driven by instinct. The blade missed him by inches, striking sparks from the stone. The crowd gasped, their joy turning to surprise. He grabbed a piece of broken chain from the ground. It was nothing compared to her weapon, but he held it with fierce resolve. The alien female swung again, aiming for his neck. He ducked low, rolling across the dirt, and came up behind her. With all his strength, he wrapped the chain around her arm. She snarled, thrashing like a beast, her claws tearing at the air. The man pulled tight, using her own momentum against her. The blade slipped from her hand and crashed to the ground. The crowd shrieked in disbelief. The last human had disarmed their warrior. For a moment, silence spread across the arena. The alien queen, watching from her throne, leaned forward, her golden eyes narrowing. The female warrior roared with rage, breaking the chain with a violent twist. She spun and struck him with her armored fist, the blow sending him crashing to the dirt. Pain exploded through his ribs. Blood filled his mouth, but he forced himself to rise. The alien screamed for her to finish him, to crush the last hope of humanity. But the man did not fall. He spat blood, straightened his back, and fixed his eyes on the warrior. Every breath burned, but his spirit would not break. In that moment, he was not prey, he was a fighter. The alien female rushed again, claws outstretched. The man caught her wrist, twisting hard until bone cracked. She screamed, a sound of fury and shame. The crowd gasped once more, the taste of fear slipping into their cheers for the first time. The savage aliens looked at the human not as prey, but as something dangerous, something that refused to die. The queen's voice rose above the noise. Sharp and cold, "Let the games continue," she commanded. The man's chest heaved as he stood in the center of the arena. The broken blade at his feet glowed faintly, and he bent to pick it up. The alien crowd howled, demanding more blood. But inside him, a whisper of hope flickered. Small yet unyielding, he was the last human, the last son of Earth, and in this savage arena, he would show them that humanity could not be crushed. Not today, not while he still drew breath. The night. Inside the alien fortress was never truly dark. Strange purple fires burned along the walls, and shadows of monstrous statues stretched across the stone. The human sat chained in a cold cell, his body bruised and aching, but his mind would not rest. Every beat of his heart carried him back to Earth, to a world that no longer existed. He closed his eyes, and in the silence of the dungeon, he saw the skies of home, blue and endless, filled with clouds that drifted gently across the horizon. He saw his family, faces that gave him strength, faces that smiled even in the hardest times. He remembered his little sister running through the fields, laughing as the wind chased her hair, and his mother's voice, soft but firm, telling him that humans were stronger than they ever believed. But then came the fire. He remembered the ships in the sky, alien war machines tearing through Earth's defenses. Cities crumbled, forests burned, and oceans boiled under strange weapons. The alien females, savage and merciless, descended upon humanity like predators upon prey. They took the strong for the arenas, the weak for their cruel experiments, and left the world in ruins. He had been young, but not untested. He had fought in the resistance, carrying weapons made from scraps, leading raids in broken cities. He had watched friends fall beside him, one by one, until only he remained, and when the aliens finally captured him, they dragged him across the stars, calling him their last trophy. They thought they had broken him, but they had only carved his will into something sharper. A sound echoed through the dungeon, heavy footsteps approaching. The human opened his eyes, the memories fading, but the fire inside him still burning. A guard appeared, her armored form filling the doorway, her eyes glowing with cruel amusement. She carried food, a bowl of something thick and dark, and she pushed it toward him with a sneer. He took it without a word, swallowing the bitterness of the meal. Every small act of survival mattered. Every breath kept him alive for one more fight. The guard laughed, speaking in her alien tongue, calling him weak, calling him prey. But when she turned to leave, he whispered to himself words she could never understand. I am human, and I endure. The hours passed slowly, the walls of his cell pressing down like a cage of silence. Yet inside his mind, the human built a different world. He pictured Earth not as it was destroyed, but as it once had been. The green forests, the rivers that shone like silver, the mountains that reached for the sky. He held these images like weapons, sharper than blades, stronger than chains. When sleep finally came, it brought no peace, only visions of battle. He dreamed of standing once again in the arena, the alien crowd screaming for his death. He saw the queen on her throne, her golden eyes burning with hatred, and in the dream, he stood defiant, lifting his voice so all could hear. You will not erase humanity. The chains rattled as he woke, sweat dripping down his face. It was still night, though the alien fires made every hour feel the same. The human rose slowly, his body aching but his spirit steady. He pressed his hand against the wall, whispering again the memory of Earth, not to mourn it, but to remember why he fought. Far above, in the royal chambers of the fortress, the queen spoke with her generals. She was angry, her voice sharp like a blade. How did he survive? She demanded. He is one, weak and broken, yet he stood against our warrior. The generals bowed, their eyes lowered, for none dared to answer. The queen's lips curled into a cruel smile. Then we shall give him more battles, and when he breaks, the whole galaxy will see it. But she did not understand. What kept the last human alive was not strength of body alone. It was memory, it was hope, it was the spirit of Earth living inside him. Every scar was a story. Every wound was proof that he could still endure. The aliens believed they had taken everything from him, but they had not. They had only given him a reason to fight harder. The man lay back against the cold stone, his eyes staring into the firelight. The whispers of earth still in his heart. The arenas would come again. The battles would grow deadlier, but he was ready, for in the silence of the dungeon, he was not only the last human, he was the last memory of a world that once defied the stars, and he would carry that memory into every fight until the very end.
The arena gates opened with a grinding roar, metal grinding against stone. The crowd of alien females filled the night with their voices, each shout like thunder rolling across the sky. The air shook with their hunger for blood, their golden eyes glowing as they leaned forward to see the fight. The last human stepped out from the shadows, his body still bruised, his ribs aching, but his spirit unbroken. Chains no longer bound his hands, but his freedom was no gift. He was here only to fight, to bleed, and to entertain the savage crowd. Every step across the black stone floor echoed like a drumbeat, a reminder of his fragile life. But his eyes, dark and steady, searched the arena as if he were not the hunted but the hunter. From the opposite gate, his challenger emerged. She was a giant compared to him, armored from head to toe in thick bone plates. Her hair was braided with metal rings that clinked with each step. Her weapon was a curved blade taller than the man himself, glowing with strange alien fire. The crowd screamed her name, beating their fists against the walls. She raised her weapon high, basking in their adoration, her fangs bared in a cruel smile. Then she turned her gaze to the human, her expression shifting to pure contempt. To her, he was no warrior, only prey dragged here to die. The human bent low, his hand closing around a broken spear lying in the dirt. It was dull, cracked, and far weaker than the blade she carried. But he gripped it with steady hands, remembering every lesson carved into him by survival. Strength could be broken, but will could never be chained. The queen watched from her throne high above, her eyes sharp with interest. She wanted blood, but she also wanted to see how far this last human could go before his spirit snapped. The generals whispered among themselves, some mocking, some wary. But none could look away, for this fight was no ordinary game. The warrior charged, her footsteps shaking the stone, her blade cutting through the air with deadly speed. The human rolled to the side, the strike missing him by inches, sparks flying where the blade struck the ground. The crowd hissed in anger. They wanted blood, not dodging. But the man knew that one wrong move would end him. She swung again, faster, her weapon whistling like a storm. This time he raised the broken spear, catching the blow with desperate strength. The clash sent fire up his arms, the spear cracking under the force. He stumbled back, his ribs screaming with pain, but he refused to fall. The alien female laughed, her voice cruel and sharp. "You are nothing," she hissed in her tongue, though he could not understand. But the meaning was clear in her eyes, in her fangs, in her confidence. She believed this fight was already over. The man steadied himself, blood dripping from his hand where the spear had splintered. He looked not at her weapon, but at her eyes, her feet, the rhythm of her movements. Every fighter had a pattern. Every warrior carried a weakness. He only had to survive long enough to see it. She lunged again, raising the massive blade for a killing strike. But her weight carried her forward too quickly, her balance leaning heavy to one side. In that moment, the human twisted, driving the cracked spear into the gap between her armor plates. The spear snapped, but the jagged edge cut deep in her flesh. The warrior roared in pain, her voice shaking the arena. The crowd erupted, half in fury, half in shock. The queen leaned forward, her golden eyes narrowing. For the first time, the last human had drawn blood from one of their champions. The female warrior's rage was like a storm. She swung wildly now, her strikes faster, stronger, but less controlled. The human dodged, ducked, and rolled, each movement born of desperation. His lungs burned, his legs ached, but his mind was sharp. She struck again, her blade crashing into the ground. Before she could lift it, He moved, seizing the broken chain he had hidden around his waist. With a swift pull, he looped it around her arm and yanked hard. Her balance faltered, the great blade falling from her grasp. The crowd gasped as the weapon clattered across the stone. The last human had disarmed their warrior once again. The female's eyes widened in disbelief, her fury twisting into shame. And the human, panting, bleeding, but unbroken, stared back at her with defiance. She lunged barehanded, claws outstretched, desperate to crush him with brute force. But he caught her wrist, twisting with every ounce of strength left in him. Her scream echoed across the arena, loud enough to silence even the wild crowd. And in that moment, the human spoke, not to her but to himself. "I will not fall." The queen rose from her throne, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Enough," she commanded, her tone laced with fury and curiosity. The battle ended not with death, but with tension sharp as steel. The alien crowd hissed and growled, unsatisfied, but none dared defy the queen. The last human stood in the center of the arena, chest heaving, blood staining his skin. He had survived again, though every breath was a battle, every movement a war. The warrior was dragged away in shame, her cries echoing like thunder. And the human lifted his eyes to the queen, meeting her golden gaze without fear. For in that clash, he had proven one thing. He was not prey, he was not a trophy, he was a fighter. And no matter how savage the arena became, he would endure. The days that followed were not days at all, but endless nights of blood and survival. Each sunrise in the alien fortress meant another battle, another cruel test for the last human. The arenas never slept, the fires never dimmed, and the savage females never grew tired of their games. They wanted more louder roars, more blood staining the black stone, and more chances to break the spirit of the last human. The man was dragged from his cell again and again, his body beaten, but his eyes unbroken. Every fight was different, every challenger deadlier, each one chosen to crush him in a new way. Sometimes it was a giant with claws like swords. Other times it was two warriors at once, circling him like wolves. The crowd screamed, always demanding his end, but each time he refused to fall. He learned to read them, to see through the savagery. The alien females fought with strength and fury, but their pride made them reckless. They sought to crush their enemy with power, not patience. And the human, though weaker in body, found his strength in cunning, in timing, in endurance. One fight brought him face to face with a beast unlike any warrior. The gates opened, and out crawled a creature half human in shape, half nightmare in form. Its body was covered in scales, its mouth lined with jagged teeth, its tail whipping the air like a whip. The crowd cheered even louder, for this was no normal game. This was a punishment meant to end him. The beast charged, its screech piercing the air. The man had no weapon, only his fists and a shard of stone hidden in his hand. He dodged as the tail whipped past, cutting the ground open like a blade. He rolled under its body, stabbing the shard into its leg, drawing black blood that hissed like fire. The crowd gasped, some laughing, some snarling, as the beast howled in pain. The man climbed its back, clinging with desperate strength. The creature thrashed, smashing into walls, trying to throw him off. But with a cry born of rage and survival, he drove the shard deep into its neck. The monster collapsed, the arena shaking with the impact. The crowd roared in anger, but their fury was mixed with fear. For the last human had not only survived, but killed what they thought impossible. The queen herself leaned forward, her eyes blazing with a dangerous light. She did not stop the games, she made them worse. More warriors, more weapons, more beasts dragged into the pit. Each day the human bled, his body breaking piece by piece. But each day he stood again, defiant, his will harder than iron. Between battles, in the silence of his cell, he stitched his wounds with scraps. He sharpened broken bones into daggers, hid chains beneath the dirt. He turned every weakness into a weapon, every injury into a memory that reminded him why he fought. And though his body weakened, his spirit grew sharper, his mind clearer. The crowd began to change. Some still screamed for his death, but others whispered in awe. The last human was no longer a plaything. He was a symbol, a ghost of resistance that refused to die. The alien females who once mocked him now stared with unease. For every time he survived, it showed them that fear could cut both ways. One night, he faced 3 warriors at once, their weapons gleaming, their armor heavy with spikes. They circled him, snarling, laughing, promising to tear him apart. The human stood in silence, blood on his lips, his chest rising and falling with ragged breath. When they lunged together, he did not retreat. He stepped forward, faster than they expected. He grabbed one by the throat, slamming her into the second, their weapons clattering across the ground. The third struck, her blade cutting his arm, but he ignored the pain, twisting her wrist until her weapon fell. In a blur of motion, he turned their strength against them, their pride making them stumble. By the time the dust settled, the 3 lay defeated, and he stood alone once more. The arena was silent for the first time. Even the queen did not speak. Her golden eyes locked on him with something close to fury. She wanted him broken, but with each game, he only grew sharper, more dangerous. He was not just surviving. He was learning, adapting, becoming something they feared. The man lifted his head, sweat dripping down his face, his hands shaking, but his spirit blazing. He looked at the crowd, at the thousands of alien eyes staring down at him. And though his voice was broken and hoarse, he whispered words that carried into the silence. I'm still here. The savage games had not destroyed him. They had made him. Every fight was no longer their entertainment. It was his war. And with each battle he survived, the galaxy's last human stepped closer to becoming its deadliest. The arena fires burned brighter that night, casting long shadows across the stone. The queen herself had ordered the games to be prepared, her voice sharp with anger. The last human had survived too many battles, had defied too many deaths. Now she wanted him crushed, humiliated, erased before all who watched. The man was dragged into the arena once again, his body marked with fresh scars, his arm bound in rough cloth to stop the bleeding. He staggered, but his eyes still burned with the same dark fire. Above him, the alien females roared, their golden eyes glowing in the flames, their voices like thunder. They no longer saw only prey. They saw something they could not understand, something that refused to bow. The gates opened, and this time, 2 warriors stepped forward together. They were sisters in arms, tall and strong, their armor gleaming with blood-red paint. Each carried a double-bladed axe, heavy and sharp, their movements perfectly in sync. They circled him like hunters who had done this 1,000 times, their smiles cruel, their confidence unshaken. The human bent down and picked up a broken shield from the dirt. It was cracked, its surface dented, but in his hands it became more than a piece of metal. It became hope, it became defiance, it became the line he would not let them cross. He raised it slowly, his chest rising with steady breath, his mind clear though his body trembled. The sisters charged together, their axes swinging down like falling stars. The man raised the shield, the impact shaking his entire body, sparks flying into the night. He stumbled, but did not fall. He turned their strength against them, pushing one aside with a broken edge. The other swung again, but he dropped low, rolling under the blade and striking her knee with the rim of the shield. She roared in pain, stumbling back. The crowd gasped, some cheering, some cursing, their voices a storm above the arena. The human rose, blood dripping down his face, and raised the shield again. The sisters regrouped, their smiles gone, their eyes filled now with fury. They attacked again, faster, sharper, their movements weaving together like one deadly storm. The human blocked one, dodged another, his shield splintering under the repeated blows. Each strike tore away another piece of his defense until only shards remained. But with every strike he studied them, their rhythm, their pride, their hunger to finish him quickly. At last he saw it, the moment where one leaned too far, where the other turned too soon. When they struck together again, he shifted aside, letting their axes collide with each other. The sound rang across the arena like thunder, their weapons stuck for a moment. And in that moment he moved, faster than they expected, striking one across the throat with the broken shield's edge. She fell choking, her weapon slipping from her grasp. The second screamed, rage blinding her as she tore her axe free. But the human had already seized the fallen blade, heavy in his hands but alive with fire. He swung with all his strength, the clash shaking the ground as steel met steel. The alien female staggered back, disbelief in her golden eyes. The last human, broken, bleeding, weaponless minutes before, now stood with one of their axes in his hands. The crowd erupted, their roars a mix of fury and awe, the sound of something shifting in the air. For the first time, it was not just survival they witnessed, it was defiance becoming victory. The queen rose from her throne, her voice cutting through the storm. Enough, she commanded, though her tone was sharper, colder than before. The games were meant to break him. Yet with every fight, he had grown stronger. And now he had turned their own weapons against them. The fallen sister was dragged away, her cries echoing through the night. The surviving one glared at him, her pride wounded deeper than her flesh. But she did not attack again, for the queen had spoken, and the queen's word was law. The man stood in the center, his chest heaving, his hand gripping the alien axe like it had always belonged to him. The crowd's voices shifted, no longer only mocking or demanding blood. Some shouted in anger, others in disbelief, and some in something close to respect. The last human had become more than prey, more than a survivor. He had become a symbol, a thorn in their pride, proof that strength was not only theirs to claim. The queen sat back slowly, her eyes locked on him, her smile sharp and dangerous. She saw the truth that every battle made him stronger. Every attempt to break him only forged his spirit sharper. Her voice was soft but filled with threat as she whispered, "Then I will end you myself." The crowd fell silent at her words, for they knew what that meant. The turning point had come. No longer was the last human only a pawn in their savage games. Now he was a challenger to the queen herself, and the war inside the arena was about to rise higher than any had ever seen. The arena was silent when the queen rose from her throne. Her golden armor gleamed under the firelight, every plate carved with the history of 100 victories. The alien crowd bowed their heads, for none dared speak when their ruler stood. Her eyes locked on the last human, and in them burned both fury and something colder, a curiosity mixed with hate. "You have taken too much from me." Her voice carried like thunder, sharp and unyielding. "You have shamed my warriors, defied my beasts, and stood where none should stand." The crowd trembled at her words, but her gaze never left the man below. "I will end this myself," she declared, raising her spear high, its blade shimmering with fire that seemed alive. The gates slammed shut. No challengers, no beasts, only her. The human stood alone, bruised and bleeding, his chest heaving with ragged breaths. In his hands, he still held the alien axe he had claimed, its weight heavy but steady. He tightened his grip, knowing this was not another game. This was the final trial. The queen descended the steps, her movements smooth, her presence like a storm walking across the stone. The crowd's voices rose, their chants filling the night with the sound of war. This was no ordinary battle. This was a legend being written. The last human against the queen of the savage females. She struck first, faster than he expected, her spear cutting through the air with deadly grace. He raised the axe, blocking the strike, the clash sending sparks across the arena. The force drove him back, his knees nearly buckling, but he held. Her smile was cruel, testing him, measuring his strength as though he were prey standing against a hurricane. Again she struck, each blow sharper, faster, her weapon an extension of her fury. The man dodged, parried, his arms screaming with pain, his body breaking under the storm. But he did not stop. He refused to fall, every move born of instinct and sheer will. The queen's eyes narrowed, for each time he rose again, her own pride was wounded deeper. The battle raged across the arena. She spun her spear with impossible speed, cutting arcs of fire through the air. He ducked low, rolled, and struck back with the axe, forcing her to shift. The crowd gasped, for no one had ever made her move, not even once. Blood ran down his side where her blade had grazed him, but he ignored it. He focused on her rhythm, on the sharp snap of her strikes, on the slight pause between each swing. He knew he could not overpower her. Her strength was beyond his. But he could outlast her. He could find the flaw that pride always carried. The queen lunged, her spear stabbing forward with lethal precision. The man twisted aside, the tip grazing his arm, tearing flesh but missing his heart. He seized the moment, swinging the axe down with desperate strength. The blade met her shoulder, cutting through armor, drawing the first drop of her blood. The arena exploded with sound, half the crowd roaring in rage, half in shock. The queen staggered for the first time, her golden eyes wide with fury. She looked at him not as prey now, but as a rival, as something that had dared touch her throne. Her roar shook the stone. Her strikes grew faster, deadlier, fueled by pure wrath. The man's vision blurred with blood and sweat, his arms heavy, his body broken. But inside him burned the memory of Earth, the voices of those he had lost. He heard his mother's words, his sister's laughter, the cries of his people fading into silence. And from that silence rose strength, the kind no spear or throne could ever crush. The queen struck again, her spear descending with the weight of her empire. The human raised the axe, catching the blow, sparks blinding them both. For a heartbeat they stood locked together, her eyes burning into his gaze unyielding. And in that heartbeat, the crowd felt it too. This was no game, this was war. He twisted, breaking the lock, the spear sliding off the axe with a scream of metal. He swung upward, the axe's blade cutting across her side. The queen roared, her armor splitting, her blood spilling onto the stone. The crowd fell silent, stunned, for their ruler had been wounded by the last human. She staggered back, her golden eyes blazing with hate and disbelief. The human, though barely standing, lifted the axe once more, his body trembling but his spirit unbroken. The queen's lips curled into a cruel smile, even through her pain. "You are no ordinary prey," she hissed, her voice low and deadly. "But you will die here." The battle was not over, but something had shifted. The last human had cut the queen, had defied the empire itself. And though blood poured from his wounds, he stood taller. For he knew now that even the mightiest could bleed. The arena shook with the sound of the queen's roar. Her spear spun in her hands, leaving trails of fire in the air. The golden armor that had once gleamed without flaw was now cracked, blood running down its edges. The crowd of alien females stood in silence, thousands of eyes fixed on the impossible sight before them. The last human, broken and bleeding, stood tall with the alien axe in his hands. Every breath was a battle, every step a war, his body screaming for rest. But his spirit burned brighter than the fires of the arena. For he had done what none had believed possible. He had made the queen bleed. Her fury was like a storm, her strikes faster than ever, her voice echoing with rage. Each clash of spear and axe sent sparks across the stone, each blow driving him closer to collapse. But with every strike he answered, his arms shaking, his vision blurred, but his will unbroken. The queen's pride demanded his end, yet her every attempt to crush him only showed the crowd his defiance. She lunged, the spear cutting through the air like lightning. He dodged, the blade grazing his cheek, leaving a burning line of blood. He countered with the axe, striking across her chest. The crack of armor splitting rang louder than the crowd's cries. The queen staggered, her golden eyes burning with hate. Never before had she been wounded twice in her own arena. She looked at the man with fury, but also with something she had never given before: acknowledgement. "You fight like a warrior," she hissed, her voice sharp with both rage and respect. The human said nothing, his voice too broken, his breath too shallow. But his silence spoke louder than words. It told her he would never bow, never yield. The crowd shifted, some screaming for her victory, others watching in silence. For deep within their savage hearts, they felt fear that their queen could fall. The queen roared and charged again, her spear a storm of fire and steel. The human blocked one strike, dodged another, but the third pierced his side. Pain exploded through his body, blood flooding the ground beneath him. He dropped to one knee, his vision darkening, his body failing. The crowd erupted, their voices shaking the air, certain the fight was over. The queen raised her spear high, ready to strike the final blow. But in that moment, the man lifted his head, his eyes burning with the memory of Earth. He saw his family, his people, all those who had fallen, and he rose. With a cry torn from the depths of his soul, he swung the axe. It struck the queen's spear, shattering its tip, the sound like thunder splitting the sky. Before she could react, he turned the swing, the blade cutting deep into her side. The queen gasped, her body faltering, blood staining the stone. The arena fell silent, the crowd frozen. Their queen, the ruler of countless battles, had been struck down by the last human. She staggered, her spear broken, her strength failing. The man stood over her, his chest heaving, his body shaking, but his spirit blazing. He did not strike again, though he could. He lowered the axe, his eyes meeting hers, a silent message passing between them. Humanity could not be erased, it could not be broken. Even in its last son, it still lived, it still fought, it still endured. The queen fell to her knees, her golden eyes wide with disbelief. The crowd erupted, some screaming in rage, others in awe, for they had seen what none thought possible. The last human had stood against their queen and survived. He was no longer prey, no longer a trophy. He was a legend written in blood and stone. The man raised the axe high, his voice hoarse but strong. "I am the last human," he cried, his words echoing across the arena. "And I will not fall." The crowd roared, their voices a storm that shook the fortress. Some with fury, others with fear, and a few with something else: respect. The queen was dragged away, her blood marking the ground where she had fallen. And the man stood alone, battered but unbroken, the last human standing. He looked up at the stars above, the shimmering lights beyond the energy shield. They reminded him of Earth, of the world he had lost, of the people he carried in his heart. The war was not over, his fight was not finished. But tonight, in the savage arena, he had proven that humanity's flame still burned. The arena would never forget this night. The galaxy would never forget this man. And though his body bled, though his scars told endless stories of pain, he stood tall, the last human standing against the savage alien females, unbroken and unbowed.